what are some of your thoughts about what's going on with respects to Iran specifically? Let's talk about what's going on over there. What are you seeing?
Well, Iran's a kind of a complicated subject in that Iran has a destiny for which it has to be here. You know, Iran is Persia. It's one of the principal players in the Gog-Magog invasion of Israel, and so it has to be here for that invasion. It has an appointment on the mountains of Israel. So, as I can't see how Iran is going to end up getting hit by the Israelis, at least not with a nuclear strike over this. And I've been trying to puzzle out how in the world this was going to play out without that happening. And here we have, all of a sudden, we have tens of thousands of students uprising in the streets, and the mullahs are scared to death and pedaling backwards. So it's very fluid. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but this does seem to fit into Bible prophecy in that regard.
Right. Now, obviously, the path of least resistance would have been a regime change from a more moderate, modern leader in Iran who would, is probably still going to want to pursue nuclear technologies. But
Mousavi wasn't that moderate leader. Mousavi, the worst thing could have happened from Israel's perspective would have been for Mousavi to come into office, because then Israel's hands were tied. If she had to strike, she wouldn't be able to, because this Mousavi is, at least to the rest of the world, an unknown quantity. Where Ahmadinejad, he's made his threats, he's done all he's outlined his plans, and if in fact he has an unobstructed 4 more years and a 66% mandate in the vote, well then Israel could Netanyahu would not have a lot of trouble justifying a preemptive strike.
Mm-hmm. Now, Netanyahu has said in a campaign promises that he will not allow a nuclear Iran, and yet it appears as though, for all intents and purposes, the world is preparing and the Obama administration is preparing to tolerate a nuclear Iran. Is that what you're understanding?
Exactly. It does appear to be that way. That's why this all looks so interesting, because the situation has put itself into everything's painted into a corner that only God can get them out of. Somehow God has to settle all this and still leave Iran a viable state so that it will be there for Ezekiel's prophecy.
Right. You're alluding to Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is a 9-member consortia led by Russia, perhaps nuclear equipped, if we think that the burning of the weapons at the end of chapter Ezekiel 39 is dealing with nuclear technology. We're talking about something that involves Libya, Turkey, and we notice that the relationships with Russia and these populations listed in Ezekiel 38 and 39 have never been stronger. So many people like Joe Rosenberg, I just interviewed Dr. Ron Rhodes, who wrote a book on Northern Storm Rising regarding the Ezekiel invasion. Many of them believe this could be coming very, very soon, and that the events in Iran could actually segue into all this. Is that how you feel?
It's entirely possible. That's where you start getting into speculation. What Ezekiel says is, first off, Israel has to be a land of unwalled villages dwelling at with peace and safety, or at least an appearance of peace and safety. And so that's one obstacle to Ezekiel being anytime very soon. The second is that Israel must be, at the time of this invasion, wealthy enough to justify it being an economic invasion as opposed to it being military or philosophical or so forth. Because what it says is that when this invasion takes place, the whole rest of the world is taken by surprise, and it has to do with them taking a spoil at a time when Israel is wealthy and rich with cattle and goods and so forth.
Well, you make a good point, and I personally believe and concur with you that something has to happen to put Israel in those conditions, because they're not dwelling securely. They're not living without walls. They've got a 403-mile wall that's about 20 feet high at some places.
And isn't that interesting when you think about it in terms of Bible prophecy? that here 2,500 years ago, Ezekiel speaks about Israel being a land of unwalled villages, which today would be meaningless any place else in the world.
Yeah, so these are several of the reasons you listed. It also talks about Israel in the last days will be dwelling in the midst of the land. The word is tabor in Hebrew. It puts you into the center of the land, and I guess the question is what land mass are we talking about? Are we talking about the restricted little bit given to them in the United Resolutions 181, the partition plan, or are we talking about the land given to them in Genesis 15:18 from the river of Egypt to the river Euphrates, which would put Jordan as the Tabor, the center of that land?
Yes.
That brings up one of my theories, is that Psalm 83, which is an Arab-Israeli conflict, might likely be the event that precedes Ezekiel 38 and 39, because Ezekiel 38 doesn't list the Arab nations per se that surround Israel, that inner circle of nations.
But Psalm 83 does.
And Psalm 83 does, and of course those nations, inclusive of Lebanon, we've got the Hezbollah, Syria, Jordan, Palestinians, of course, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, the Hamas out of the Gaza, the ancient Philistia. These are characters who also want to wipe Israel off the map for the most part. At least they've demonstrated that over the last 61 years. So we have these two potential prophecies.
Well, actually three, because there's one more that links in with those, and that's Ezekiel 17, the burden of Damascus.
Exactly.
Because the burden of Damascus has never, this is not like one of those examples of a dual fulfillment. Never in recorded history for the last 5,000 years has Damascus ceased from being a city or stopped from being continuously inhabited. It's the longest, most continuously inhabited city on earth. Yet Ezekiel says that it will be taken away from being a city, or Isaiah does. In Isaiah 17, I think it's 15, right at the end of that chapter. Anyway, he says that in the evening, trouble in the morning, he is not. So, it indicates whatever cataclysm that befalls Damascus and destroys it happens. It's a whirlwind attack.
Exactly. Well, so some of the, not that we want to speculate here and do newspaper exegesis, but some speculate that something happens to Iran, rendering them of little utility to the Psalm 83 nations, because Persia is not listed in the Psalm 83 consortia. So the thought is now, and yet, the proxies of Iran these days seem to be the Hezbollah and Syria and the Hamas. So some speculate something will happen to Iran, make them of little utility, and should it be a strategic strike from Israel, this would create a domino effect where the Hamas and Syria and Hezbollah would engage in a war. Now, Israel recently exercised a 5-day Turning Point 3 drill, the largest civil defense drill in their nation's history, concluded the day Obama made his Cairo speech, and it was preparing for a multi-front war with Hezbollah, Syria, and Hamas.
and the counterstrike, there was a number of scenarios where it could only have been imitating an Iranian counterstrike. They were too big for something that could have come from Hezbollah.
Yeah, now meanwhile, President Obama wants to reach out across the religious realms and try to find common denominators between Islam and America, and he wants to engage in discussions with these people that want to wipe Israel off of the map. And Israel seems to be getting more isolated in the process. What do you think about Obama's attempt to engage in discussion to try to bring calm to the Middle East?
You have to look at it in the context of what he's saying. He's saying, I will engage with any Holocaust-denying, apocalyptic-minded, death cult-leading guy in the Middle East, but I won't engage with Israel on anything constructive. I mean, here we have a situation where the United States is 100% behind creating a Judenrein, a Jew-free zone in the West Bank, where only Arabs can live, while complaining about Israel being an apartheid state, because where 20% of its population is non-Jew. And it's into this kind of a context that we have to have this discussion. It is black is white, up is down, left is right, nothing makes any sense, and when you want one lump or two.
Jack, This whole thing we're talking about with respects to Ezekiel 38 and 39, Psalm 83, we're talking about predominantly Muslim nations. And Obama has made comments recently that we've got as much Muslims in America that would make us be one of the largest Muslim nations in the world. Now, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are about 1.4 billion Muslims in the world, and 0.6% of the population of the United States is Islamic, which is about 2 million people. And there's one